The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar hosted by SolarTech, Efficient Solar Market Partners of Northern California, the ESMP team. Today's webinar is about interconnection, which everybody wants to hear about. And it is under the Rooftop Solar Challenge, powered by Sunshot, U.S. Department of Energy. Today's webinar, Interconnection Business Practice Manual, a standardization of interconnection practices. We'll go over some general housekeeping, introductions, the presentations. We'll have a Q&A later on during the session, and then wrapping up with announcements. I'd also like to say at this time we apologize. There is a 3 to 4 second delay when we're proceeding through the slides. So again, our apologies, and we thank you for being patient with us. Some general housekeeping. For best audio fidelity, all audience will be in will be in muted mode. If you plan to use the phone for the audio, please be sure to turn off your laptop microphone. It's best to use a landline with headset, not a built-in laptop microphone. If you hear feedback, please immediately check your audio setup. We will be monitoring the question line, so if any of you have a question or need to alert the moderator and or the organizer, who is me, please post your questions in the Q&A section. We'll select and post your questions to the presenter at the appropriate time, and we'll try to get through all of them bearing time. At this time, I'd like to present to you today's moderator, David McFeely, with SolarTech, Director of Grants and Industry Solutions. Good morning, David, and welcome.
Good morning, Wendy, and thank you, everybody who's online, for joining us today. My name is David McFeely. I am the Director of Grants and Industry Solutions with SolarTech, and we're pleased today to have one of our team members for the Rooftop Solar Challenge, Ted Coe, Associate Executive Director of Clean Coalition, who will be presenting their work and initiative on Interconnection Business Best Practices Manual, a standardization for interconnection practices. So before I bring Ted online, I would like to go over a few details about SolarTech and the Rooftop Challenge. And again, as Wendy said earlier, we are experiencing about a 3 to 4 second delay as we change the slides here. So when we go quiet between slides, it's because we're waiting to see that the screen has changed on your side so that we're not talking ahead of the slides. So I can see now that the agenda slide is up. Again, this is David McFeely with SolarTech, and I will spend a few minutes talking about the DOE Rooftop Solar Challenge that we are a party to, and then I will turn the presentation over to Ted Coe of Clean Coalition to talk about their work. So let me go through a couple of slides here about SolarTech and the Rooftop Solar Challenge. Okay, SolarTech is an industry association, a collaboration of multiple different stakeholders in the solar PV industry. You can see a lot of different icons on the screen here that represent our partners, our board, and our members. We are open to all members, whether you be a manufacturer, an integrator, a university researcher, a city jurisdiction, county jurisdiction, what have you. If you have an interest and a need to participate in the solar industry to streamline best practices, we are welcome you with open arms to join our membership. But what does SolarTech do? We're not a policy organization, and we're not an R&D invention organization. We are a business practices streamlining organization. And on the screen here in front of you, you see a value chain representation of how a solar PV system comes to market. Starting with closing the deal, all the way through taking care of it in the field, the post-commissioning, maintenance, and operations. All along the way there are various different processes and handoffs between various different parties who come into play in making this happen for the consumer or the customer. And some of those processes are efficient, and some of those handoffs are efficient, and some of those handoffs are not as efficient as they could be, such as interconnection, which we will talk about today, or permitting, financing best practices, performance metrics, installation best practices. All these different things add soft costs, which increase the overall cost of the system and delay the actual consumer turn-on and the enjoyment of the revenue generation from their system. That's what SolarTech is all about, and that's why we are participating in this Rooftop Solar Challenge with the DOE. I might also mention to my participants on the call here that you mute your phone so that we don't pick up any keyboard typing or any other paper shuffling noises during this presentation. This presentation is being recorded and will be made available to those who could not attend today at a later date. On the screen now you see an image of our nation showing the various different participants in the Rooftop Solar Challenge. There are over 22 teams that have been selected by the Department of Energy to look at streamlining best practices in their own local region, again in terms of permitting, interconnection, and finance best practices for that local area as a way of creating solutions and then sharing those solutions between the teams. I know that some of those teams are actually on this webinar call today, and I thank you for joining, and I look forward to hearing some of your work in the future. So let me discuss a little bit about my particular team that SolarTech is running here. So on the screen here you should see my picture at the beginning. I'm the project manager for the Rooftop Solar team. And again, we're picking up some background noise, so whoever's typing or shuffling papers, if you could put your phone on mute. Let me start off with Danielle Murray of the San Francisco Department of Environment, the Renewable Energy Program Manager. Next, Allison Healy of Solar Sonoma County, covering the whole county of Sonoma in Northern California. She's the Executive Director. Then Carla Den of the East Bay Green Corridor, which is a collaboration of numerous East Bay jurisdictions in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then finally, our keynote presenter today, Ted Coe of Clean Coalition. So let me go briefly into what each one of these participants will be working on with the Rooftop Solar Challenge. Okay, let me start off with Carla Dim. They're going to be, the East Bay Green Corridor is going to be driving standardizations and expediting solar permitting processes in their 9 East Bay region jurisdictions, removing permitting barriers, working with those different jurisdictions to see if there's a common way that they can streamline across all those jurisdictions, so that if you're an integrator working in that area, as you go from city to city jurisdiction, you're not experiencing a completely different permitting process, but you're seeing roughly the same kind of process implemented in each jurisdiction, and a fairly clean and easy process for you to make use of. And then Solar Sonoma County, again, the Executive Director, Allison Healy, her picture down at the bottom, along with her project manager, Brian Ewan, and Aaron Lannon, the project manager also for their project, showing the various different things that they'll be working on in permitting, clean energy advocacy and financing, their purposes, objectives, and target audience, the different kinds of things that they will be coming up with over the course of their involvement in the Rooftop Solar Challenge. So we're very excited to have both the East Bay Green Corridor and the Solar Sonoma County as participants in our Rooftop Solar Challenge team. Next is the City and County of San Francisco, also working on numerous different objectives, streamlining permitting. They actually did a presentation less than 2 weeks ago on their streamlined permitting process for less than 4 kW size systems for residential rooftops. So a very exciting presentation and some very unique and innovative things that they've done in the city of San Francisco. They'll also be documenting purchasing and community solar models, developing a SunShares employee group buy program for their local area, and documenting opportunities and barriers to virtual net metering and identify sites for virtual net metering pilots within the city of San Francisco. And they're also undertaking a solar access study to identify policy and programmatic options for shading for solar systems by new construction. So that if you put in a solar system and then later on somebody builds a high-rise south of you that might shade your system, how can you be economically compensated so that you might be willing to put that system in today, knowing that in the future if something happened, you would be economically compensated in some way, shape, or fashion to encourage more solar to go in and remove that barrier to adoption. So last year is Clean Coalition as one of our major partners. They are looking at interconnection, that's their area of expertise, and their main focus will be on coming up with a business practice manual for interconnection, and more of an operational manual that could be shared and adopted as a gold standard amongst the independent utility operators as well as the municipal operators. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here on this at this point in time. I'd rather turn it over at this point in time to Ted Coe to go into more depth since this is his area of expertise. And I apologize for the delay. It does take quite a bit of time for the internet to change these slides for some reason. So again, this is our team for the Rooftop Solar Challenge for the northern San Francisco Bay Area. And I look forward to working with all of you out there that are on the webinar today and collaborating with you further as well as with my own team partners. So let me introduce Ted Coe, the Associate Executive Director of Clean Coalition. Ted will talk today about their Interconnection Business Practices Manual Initiative and standardizations for interconnection practices. So Ted, I think this is the point in time where you have the floor, and I welcome you to today's webinar.
Good morning. Thanks David. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks everyone for attending today's webinar. The Clean Coalition is a nonprofit organization whose mission it is to implement policies and programs to get more clean energy online that's cost effective, that happens soon, and it has the best environmental benefits. So we work with at the regulatory and legislative level, as well as advocating and partnering with other organizations such as SolarTech to make it easier, faster, cheaper to develop and bring online more clean energy. So actually, we could go to the next slide, dude. This is just, again, the introduction slide. I'm the Associate Executive Director, Clean Coalition. We are a Northern California-based organization, but we do work all across the country in cities and states and at the federal level on clean energy policy. Okay, so the overall concept of an interconnection business practice manual is that there's two different sides of how interconnection is done. There's the tariff and the rules that the utilities are operating under, and depending on whether you're an investor-owned utility that's regulated by a state agency like a Public Utilities Commission, or whether you are a municipal agency, depends on which rules you're subject to. You may have state-mandated rules, or you may have your own your governing board of your utility have your own rules about how interconnection is done. Then there's those tariffs, and then there's the idea of how those rules are actually implemented in practice on the ground. And the basic idea is that how you actually implement the rules may not be specified in the actual tariff or the rule set. And so we'd like to have what's called a business practice manual, which is more of a how-to that is given to a solar installer, for example, essentially detailing to them step by step what's the experience they're going to go through, who they're going to talk to, how long it's going to take, these kind of ideas for interconnecting their system. So the overall project for this this effort as part of the Sunshine Initiative and the phase one of this is to create a framework for how this standard business practice manual would look like, and give people a template, or give utilities a template for how they could publish what they're doing today. So the first part of this, the first goal and intent of this whole initiative is to have the utilities at least publish something about what they're doing today, so that we have that transparency, and that installers can have something to look at and learn about before they enter into the process. And so this overarching framework would look something like a flow chart, a process flow chart, which will tell you, the installer, what steps you're going to go through, who you're going to talk to at certain points. And then the framework the BPM framework would then give the different sections and outline of what the utilities would fill into this document for their particular jurisdiction and their particular processes. As part of this phase one, the next step is we actually be looking to partner with the rest of the Rooftop Solar Challenge teams to gather initial data and documentation from their local utilities and solar installers in their regions to find out what should go into this framework. What are the things we're missing? What are the steps? We're going to ensure we capture all the steps. And the Clean Coalition will work on a standard questionnaire that all the other teams can go ask their utilities installers what they do now, and whether they have anything published now or what they publish, and how they educate their installers about their interconnection processes. Then we'll revise this framework based on that data and create this template. And in this template, we'll be trying to incorporate some of the scoring elements from the Rooftop Solar Challenge, which had things like, how many days did it take to process application, other things that the Department of Energy determined were the ways to measure how good your interconnection process, how streamlined your interconnection processes are. We'll create that template, and then we'll ask each of the RTSC teams to customize their own template for their region, so that they can try to get all of their utilities in their region to publish a BPM. And that's really the ultimate goal of the first phase of this whole project, is that there's a standard template that people will, once they see it and understand it, they'll know what to expect wherever they go, and then just to have those utilities publish what they're doing today in that template form, so that installers can start to see, take the first step, which is just seeing and understanding what the processes are. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Great. So after this phase one, and the extent of the first phase of the DOE's Sunshot grant, the Rooftop Solar Challenge, is a one-year project, and the extent of what we think we'll be able to get through to that is what I detailed in phase one. Phase two, we hope the follow-on to the phase one of the Rooftop Solar Challenge grant would include further funding to take this to the next level, which is go from what are we doing today and making sure that all the utilities are publishing some kind of manual, to actually finding the best practices and coming up with a gold standard. So the idea would be to look at what everyone else has published, look at, gather the information, gather the manuals from around the country, working with all the other Rooftop Solar Challenge teams, and then work on finding best practices, interviewing these utilities more about what they can do, what they plan to do to make the process even better, document all that input, and create what we're calling version one of the actual gold standard, which is the combined list of national best practices from around the country, and then pull that all together into the gold standard business process manual, and then hold a series of webinars and outreach efforts to promote that to all the different utilities with the ultimate intent of them launching their own efforts to launching their own projects to move from where they are today to this gold standard, to actually being able to implement and offer the best practices and process to solar installers that want to interconnect into their systems. Next slide. So on the research to date, what we've done some preliminary research as the Clean Coalition, and what we found is that we have people who have picked up the different variations of the tariff. So it depends. In California, we have Rule 20, what's called Rule 21. There's variations of this all around the country. But what we've seen in California is that different utilities will actually often adopt their own variations of this rule. The rule in California, this is one that's mandated by the California Public Utilities Commission. So the investor-owned utilities must adhere to this rule, but the publicly owned utilities, the POUs, can adopt whatever variations of this they'd like. We found that some of the ones that the utilities that have published their own versions of the rules, like for example, Palo Alto has what's called Rule 27, are actually quite similar to Rule 21. There hasn't been a whole lot of variation. So what we've seen is that it's not a matter of, in terms of opportunity for streamlining interconnection, it's less of a matter of improving the tariffs, the rules, and more of a matter of standardizing and improving the actual business practices of how they implement those rules. So we found that the utilities that we've talked to, or we've looked at and we've investigated, they don't publish an actual business practice manual. We did get one of these business practice manuals from the California Independent System Operator, which is an ISO that deals with transmission level interconnection, but that's not at the distribution grid. It's not the utility distribution grid. So we haven't seen utilities at the distribution grid level publish a business practice manual for their local solar installers. So we're considering using the CalISO BPM as a starting framework. But again, this one is really targeted at people who are building large systems, in the tens and hundreds of megawatts, connecting to the transmission level high voltage system, not the lower voltage distribution grid. So the closest thing we have to input into a business practice manual is a flow chart that was provided with Rule 21. But this again is a tariff, and it's not a business practice manual. Let's go to the next slide. So what are the best practices, some of the best practices we've seen? There hasn't been a lot of documentation or research into what those best practices are. But if we think of the kind of 5 major areas of business practices that would go into this manual, we talk about processes, what are the steps, how long does it take, what are the timelines, who are the people that are going through the interconnection process. All we have right now is we have the Rooftop Solar Challenge scoring methodology, which had some fairly simple metrics. And then we have this possibility of looking at the Vermont registration process, which some of you may know that was extended from up to a 10 kW solar system, which turned interconnection from a application and study process and permission process into a registration where it's literally a one-page form that a solar installer fills out to say, I'm going to interconnect our system. And the utility then has a certain number of days to respond to that form if there's a problem. Otherwise, it's assumed they can just plug it in. This is a kind of, in some ways, a revolutionary concept in the whole idea around interconnection, and it works. It seems to work at the lower size levels, below 10 kW. We would have to look into that more closely to see whether that's something that utilities around the country could adopt at in the same way. I mean, can we vastly streamline, extremely streamline the process for the smaller systems by making it just the default you plug in without having to go through a lengthy process to get permission. So that's a potential idea that we have to look at in this whole process. Some of what we call controls is controls are accountability and transparency to what actually happens. And so giving, not only the solar installers, but, the policymakers and everyone else understanding that the processes are working. That includes, publishing timelines and metrics around what's going on, but also it could include like a utility ombudsman, someone who is there to answer questions, is always on to answer questions, or even handle some disputes or problems, or work through barriers to interconnection. That's dedicated to that on behalf of the solar installers. Some of the other ideas we've seen around interfaces, around what kind of interfaces do you provide to the solar installers, include maps of the grid. If you can provide maps of the grid to installers before they even apply, it should make the whole process much easier for everyone, so they understand what kind of what are good places, what are bad places to plug in, what are the kind of technical issues that might occur at your particular point where you want to install your system. We've found already that this is a helpful thing to have and something that installers would want. Some of the other interfaces that we've seen already, for example, is online applications. Can you do it fully online? There are a lot of utilities that still require you to fill out paper to apply for interconnection. One of the things that we've heard about recently at the recent Solar Summit in March was San Diego Gas and Electric, one of our big IOUs here in California, is working on going past online application into full-on tracking. So you can look at where your application is in the whole process anytime you want by logging into to their online system. Some of the another best practice that could be included in the business practice manual would be just publishing of costs. If it's going to cost you for permits or inspection or other kinds of even technical costs to interconnect to the distribution grid, what does it cost people before? In what kind of situations? How can I understand going into the process how much it's going to cost me to interconnect? And then the last major area of best practices we think would be in coordination. To the extent that you need to integrate processes and workflow between different departments of the utility, or even between the utility and the local jurisdiction and their inspectors. One step depends on someone else doing something in the next step in the process. How is that coordination happening? Are they talking to each other? Do they pick up the phone? Do they have a good tracking system for making sure that things don't get stuck or held up in a particular part of the workflow? If we can document that and then find out best practices from around the country about how people are collaborating and coordinating between departments, we can also document that into a gold standard business practice manual. So next slide. So the status of where we are now as an organization, as an effort here is that we've had a couple, the Clean Coalition has had a couple initial discussions with a few of the RTSC teams to discuss this concept and this initiative as a way to work on interconnection and the interconnection goals within the Rooftop Solar Challenge. Part of the original Rooftop Solar Challenge had some focus on working on the actual tariffs and the rules, which I think several teams, and we have found that in the time frame that we're talking about with the 1 year time frame, the initial phase, is not something that we would think we could actually expect to make a meaningful change in the rules of the laws in that time frame. So the focus can shift towards this business practice manual, which is really working on what the utilities do on the ground and doesn't require any kind of change in laws or regulation in order to see improvement. So in some cases, for some of the teams, this could mean a reallocation of the grant money that had been targeted towards potentially changing the standards and the rules towards this kind of work, working with us and working to get a standard BPM for their region as part of phase 1 of this grant. So we're definitely welcome and interested in as many of the other teams as possible who would be interested in working with us on this and collaborating with us on this to contact me and let us know that we want to work together. So the next step is we do want to coordinate that, have another meeting with all the RTSC team contacts that are interested, and go through next steps as to what they can do and what we're going to do as Clean Coalition and as the Northern California team is going to do in the coming months. We do hope to have an initial BPM framework by the end of June, one that everyone can start talking about with their regions. And then in early and mid-July, have questionnaires that they can use, that everybody can take to their utilities and to their solar installers, so we can gather more information for the BPM framework document in the template. And next slide. Oh, next steps. So again, next steps for anyone on this call, as we really encourage any of the teams that have interconnection as part of their part of the Rooftop Solar Challenge grant and working on improving interconnection, to contact me at this email address. And then also for cities and utilities that are interested in this and that would like to be part of this process, reach out to your local team, talk to them about what they're doing with interconnection, and then establish that connection so that they can come to you when it's time to gather information, your input into this whole process. And finally, again, solar installers, also reach out to your team. We want to get your experience. We want to understand what you go through, what your local utilities have, in your experience, what your local utilities have provided to you in terms of your experience in the process, and what should be improved in that process. We would want to gather all that data also from all the different teams in the region. And with that, I think that is it for my presentation. Welcome, of course, any questions, and looking forward to collaborating with as many of you as possible who are interested in helping us move forward on this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ted. That's very helpful and very informative. And so we're moving into the portion of the program now where we start off with a little bit of Q&A. I have a list of questions here that I have for you, and Wendy is monitoring the chat line, and in maybe another 5 or 10 minutes we will start answering some of the questions coming in on the chat line. So for those of you who are on the webinar today, we encourage you to send your questions in via the chat line. And as I said, Wendy is monitoring those, and I'll ask her to read those out in a few minutes. And I just want to go backwards on a couple of slides before I get started with some of my questions. Just again reiterate a couple of clarifying points. Where it says RTSC, that stands for Rooftop Solar Challenge. Again, that is a DOE-funded or DOE-powered, as they like to say, challenge grant across 22 teams nationally to look at standards and best practices and lowering soft costs in residential solar PV installations. So when you see RTSC, again, that's Rooftop Solar Challenge. So, and then also just to kind of amplify something that Ted was discussing, we're seeing this portion of our team challenge, and I'm kind of speaking to the other Rooftop Solar Challenge teams that might be on the webinar. This whole interconnection thing is not really something that can be solved at a regional level. It's very broad, as you know. It sometimes often requires intervention at a state utility level. And so what we're thinking is that this is something where we're going to be able to move the needle or move the ball down the field, as so to speak, a lot faster and better if we engaged a lot more partners and acted in a broader coalition perspective than as a individual team activity. So that's why Ted is reaching out to any and all of you out there on the line who would be interested in participating or contributing. Maybe you have a relationship that's fairly strong with your local utility, either an IOU or a muni, that would benefit from being a party to this. So I just want to kind of put that out there to, again, contact Ted at the email you see up here, and see if there's a way that your team or your connection with a local utility can best be leveraged. So proceeding on more to the Q&A session. So Ted, along that line, maybe you could just describe very briefly, what Rooftop Solar Challenge teams you've already been in contact with, and what's been the reception so far on getting involved in this particular project.
Right, so we did talk with the Optiny team for, again, just really initial conversations about this idea. I think they were pretty interested in how we can work together. We need to go into the next steps with them in terms of, like I was saying, create the initial framework and the initial questionnaires that they can then talk to their partners and the rest of the team about, which utilities and solar installers, as well as potentially, some of the teams, like Optiny, I believe, have academia partners, partners from the universities that could have also some of them doing some of the information gathering work also. We did have a talk with the Texas team, and again, that was also productive as an idea. As we should work on this idea together. I think they were, to what I said in that one of those last slides. They had said that they had to work with, again, the DOE to work on, do they reallocate some of the grant money that was targeted at interconnection under the first phase of this to this effort, and whether that kind of change would be possible under the DOE grant procedures. And so that's really the kinds of things that we're looking to do with people is, help identify what efforts or what resources they have locally in their regions that could contribute to this, both in gathering information as well as outreaching to their utilities.
Thank you. And then you did a pretty good job of outlining what you called Phase 1 and Phase 2. And Phase 1 being what you envision being able to accomplish under the current funding within this one-year time frame. I'm wondering if you could just re-summarize again what you're envisioning as an output document from Phase 1 versus what you would envision as an output deliverable from Phase 2, assuming the DAP portion of the project was eventually funded in some way or fashion.
Sure. The output of Phase 1 is really this standard template that which we think that each of the regional each of the regions can customize to their own use, so that they can get some kind of standardization in their region. With the goal being that by the end of Phase 1, every one of the local utilities that is working with a Rooftop Solar Challenge team has looked at the template, ideally published something, a version of their own BPM of what they're doing right now within that template, and then committed or initiated a process to start looking towards how we can get improve towards best practices. But really, I think it would be a success. We could already call it a success if each of the utilities had published something that's available on their website to any solar installer who wants to interconnect, that has very clear and detailed document of the processes which the solar installer will go through when they're trying to interconnect.
Okay, thank you. One of the other partners that SolarTech works quite a bit with is the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, otherwise known as IREC, and they've done a lot of work in the interconnection arena over the years. I'm wondering if you could describe for the audience how you envision your proposal for an interconnection business practices manual as different, similar, or complementary to what IREC has published over the last couple of years.
Right. So IREC has done tremendous work on looking at the different tariffs and rules, like Rule 21, or different jurisdictions have adopted different rules. Also looking at SGIP, which was the federal level interconnection rules for distributed small-scale interconnection. And so they've created through all that research and through their work, they've created a set of kind of best practices for what the rules should look like. And so this work is very complementary. It's if you take those rules, how do you implement those rules? How are you actually on the ground? How you, a utility, are on the ground implementing those rules, and in a way that the solar installers can understand it. So at this current time, even the utilities that have adopted some of the best rules, all the solar installer can see really is, here are the rules, and they can look at the tariff, which is legalese. It's not a how-to manual at all. It's like this is these are the rules of the game, but it doesn't translate that into something that an installer would know how to go through, what steps they're going to go through, timelines, is something that the business practice manual will do for them. So I think it could be very very complementary in terms of look at what IREC has produced and look at trying to get people to adopt the rules, and then documenting how they've actually done that in a way that's accessible to solar installers.
Okay, thank you. For this business practice manual for interconnection, does it make a difference if you're a publicly owned utility or an investor-owned utility? Is there a difference in approach or how you envision this project moving forward?
I think the difference between those two is really more along the rules you're subject to. So they should, and the rules around interconnection are of course very different between a investor-owned utility and a publicly owned utility. So the investor-owned utilities are subject to a lot more regulation. So the business practice manual should both, they'll look different between the two utilities in terms of what the actual processes are. In a lot of cases, I think the publicly owned utilities can actually have a much simpler process, not quite the same level of regulation that they're held to, so they could be much simpler. But the concept is the same. It's still, how do you make sure that the installer has as much information, as much knowledge about the process ahead of time as possible, and by giving them the best information and educating them the best you can before they even start the process is going to make everybody's lives better. And so in either case, I think that's still true, whichever kind of utility you are.
And along those lines, one of the other tasks that you were taking on for Clean Coalition was this thing that you called Rule 21 Lite. I'm wondering if you could just spend a few seconds on describing that, and then we'll begin taking questions from the chat line.
Sure. Yeah. So Rule 21 Lite was this idea that, again, if you're a publicly owned utility, you could adopt a simpler, smaller, easier version of Rule 21, and some of them have. But so the idea is that if we could get that version and make it streamlined, simpler, and easier for everyone, and then standardize around that, then an installer who is working in multiple jurisdictions or for different, trying to install in different utilities, would then have a standard set of rules they know that they're going to be going through between different publicly owned utilities rather than different investor-owned utilities. So it's a combination of both standardization to make it easier for everyone, so they don't have to learn a new set of rules every time they go to a new city, as well as simplification if it's possible to simplify for a much smaller, grid or less regulated, more independently regulated grid. Both these things should hopefully help, again, make the interconnection process simpler and easier for everyone.
And again, all of this is about lowering soft costs in the overhead burden that the installer has to bear in trying to, conduct business and sell and install solar systems throughout a particular region, whether they're a local installer or they're a national firm. We talk a lot about Germany, and one of the things that's been obvious with Germany for well over 5 or 6 years is that, from the very beginning, along with their feed-in tariff, they also streamlined their whole permitting and utility interconnection process for residential systems, making it very simple and easy to for the installer or the owner of that particular building or property to install a solar system. So that's, in a nutshell, what we're trying to accomplish here with the Rooftop Solar Challenge. So at this point in time, let me ask Wendy what kind of questions we're getting on the chat line, and if she could maybe read off 1 or 2 of those for you, Ted. And so let's begin taking questions from the audience.
Great. Thanks, David. Ted, SEPA. SEPA has more than 400 utility members, and they also have members that 90% of their members have U.S. installed solar within their territory, meaning solar capacity. Being an optimal resource, has Clean Coalition reached out to SEPA for any collaboration, coordination, or so forth? And if so, please let us know. And if not, it seems that they're more than happy to get involved.
Great. That's I'm very excited to hear that. Actually, for this particular initiative, we have not actually reached out to SEPA yet. We had the Clean Coalition had a good relationship with SEPA, but we did a webinar about 2 months ago around clean or feed-in tariff programs, but not for interconnection. So yeah, we'd love to work with SEPA on reaching out to all their members on this initiative.
Especially the utilities, because they would be a great resource to get the utilities to take the survey as well as promote the best practice manuals that the Clean Coalition is going to be introducing.
Absolutely.
Another question that came in, as we know, there's a lot of focus on streamlining permitting and a lot of focus on a standard application form for permitting, but not so much on the interconnection side. Do you envision a standard IC application form as part of the BPM framework, or is this not relevant or needed? This is also something that was brought up at the SolarTech Leadership Summit in the Interconnection breakout session, and one of the initiatives for the Interconnection Committee that works closely with the Rooftop Solar Challenge team. So can you kind of elaborate on a little bit for us?
Yeah, I think there. What I would think is that we would like to move towards standard forms. The application form is the very first step of the process. And if there's, I would actually honestly think that would be more of the forms themselves could be more of a regional standardization rather than a national standardization around the forms, because I think there'll be regional variations in exactly what you want to be in the application for that part of the grid. But to get that kind of regional standardization, I think would help absolutely, and we could have some best practices in the gold standard BPM eventually of what those forms look like, as well as how simplified they could be, hopefully. But yeah, I think that would the form and instructions on how to fill out the form and requirements of the form should be part of what you publish in your BPM, so that again you don't get into back and forth or disputes, or the utilities would love the most complete, comprehensive application possible first time in. So to the extent your BPM can really show that and give that instruction, I think is just helps everybody.
Great. David, this question is for you. There was a similar webinar a couple of weeks ago, and the host sent out a questionnaire with regards to interconnection. How is the SolarTech RTCS team / ESMP team affiliated with Sunshot, and are their efforts being doubled within the teams?
Okay, yes, thank you. So the Rooftop Solar Challenge is a part of the overall Sunshot umbrella. And there are a lot of different initiatives under that Sunshot umbrella, more numerous than what I can articulate at this point in time. And you know, in some cases there is overlap, and I actually see that as a positive thing. You know, it's not always possible to, as any well-run company knows, to launch a particular project that's going to, you know, be able to come up with the right solution for the right need at that right time. So a lot of times it actually is beneficial from having a little bit of overlap and a little bit of competition and a little bit of collaboration. So to the extent that we are able to, we are in conversation with all other teams in all other projects. There's a lot of projects going on, so it's a little difficult to be aware of all of those. But we are collaborating back and forth as best as we can. The Department of Energy did conduct a major summit conference last week in Denver, convening all of the teams under the Sunshot program. And there was over a 4-hour session, I think Wednesday night, of different kind of poster booth vendor fair type format, where we could all walk around and try to introduce ourselves to each other and learn what the other teams are up to and collect business cards and collaborate. So there is a lot of collaboration encouraged. There's just a lot going on, and it's hard to keep track of it all.
Great. Thank you, David. I don't see any more questions coming through at this point in time. But again, audience, if you do have any questions, please feel free to either send them to Tedco or David McFeely, and we will show their contact information again. It will also be noted on the slides that will be posted to our website, as well as distributed to everyone who was in attendance. And David, I guess at this point we can move through.
I have just one more question for Ted, and then I think we could probably move into the wrap-up. So, Ted, let's look at this from the utilities perspective, and maybe get your thoughts on that. You know, what concerns would you envision the utilities having with adopting or helping to implement a interconnection business practice manual, best practices? And what can we do to maybe alleviate some of those concerns?
Thanks, David. Generally, I think we found that the utilities are pretty much on board with the idea that they, you know, the more they can educate the installers about what, you know, the processes and what's going on, the better off the whole system is for everyone. If they have any concerns about it, I think if there's any issues around, it's been suggested here and there that maybe they have some issues around confidentiality of information, or potentially being held to like certain timelines, or you know, issues if, you know, people could, you know, raise complaints if their, you know, their processes aren't somehow, you know, exactly meeting this, you know, what's put out in the business practice manual. I think those are you know, slight concerns that, you know, some people may think about, but I think that the way we're really presenting this is as something that's a, you know, educational tool and service that they're providing to their customers, and something that you know, everyone will just appreciate them doing without it turning into any kind of issues and problems around that, because it doesn't have any kind of, these business practice manuals won't have any kind of, you know, force of law or regulation on any of these utilities. So I don't believe it'll be problematic in that way. So I really think that we should just see this as, you know, better customer service to the potential solar installers, and something that will just be a positive for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
David, this is Wendy. We have one question that came through. Do we have time for this one question? I'm pretty sure it'll be quick for Ted.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Ted, is there an example of a one-page application that could be shared?
Right now, the only one-page application I've seen is the Vermont one, which we tracked down. It's a little tricky to find on the Vermont website, but the Vermont utility website. But we can send it out to people if they're interested.
Great, thank you. Okay, David, back to you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we will probably begin the process of finishing off this webinar today. I'd like to make note of our partners listed at the bottom of the slide that you're looking at right now. Again, this is powered by the Sunshot program from the Department of Energy. And again, this is kind of a contest type program. They've initiated a lot of different grants and projects under the Sunshot program in a race to drive down the cost of solar PV energy nationwide and make it a more common grid parity energy option for the consumers. So I applaud them in their wisdom in moving forward with the Sunshot program, along with my partners, the East Bay Green Corridor, Solar Sonoma County, and the San Francisco Department of the Environment, and then our guest speaker today, Ted Coe from Clean Coalition. So with that, Wendy, we can move to the next slides and close off this webinar for today.
Great, thanks, David. I'd like to give you an update on some up-and-coming webinar schedule. On July 11th, we will have Solar Sonoma County give us an update. The specific topic is to be determined. And on July 25th, East Bay Green Corridor will present their updates, and again, the topic will be determined. The time of our webinars are always scheduled for 9:30 Pacific Standard Time unless otherwise indicated. So please keep your eye out for the invitation on those. I'd like to give a special acknowledgement and thanks to the Department of Energy Sunshot Program, powered by the Sunshot U.S. Department of Energy, and all of the many individuals, both directly and outside of Sunshot, working to streamline this industry and ensure a viable environment for solar PV. Today, I'd also like to thank everyone who attended today's webinar. We had attendance from various market segments, from utilities to installers, developers, local governments, federal governments, financing firms, and just about everybody. SolarTech will be hosting its annual performance symposium, Capitalizing Solar as an Asset Class for the Mass Market, on July 9th at InterSolar in San Francisco. We welcome you to, and we encourage you to attend this symposium. It is annual. We host it every year with basically kicking off InterSolar. To register for this event, go to www.intersolarnorthamerica.com or just Google InterSolar North America and register for the event. To stay connected with SolarTech, please visit our website at www.solartech.org and watch for future informative webinar offerings.
I believe that's the last slide, Wendy.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you everyone for attending, and if you have any questions, please contact David McFeely at dmcfeely@solartech.org, or if you want to get involved or even have questions directly, would like to pose questions directly to Ted Coe, his contact information is ted@clean-coalition.org. Thank you again for attending, and we wish you have a wonderful, pleasant day.
Thank you, everybody.